Okay, so my presentation per this thing is interlockings and towers on Erie's New York Division, the familiar and the less known. And I'll explain a little bit about this. Actually, I have a two-part presentation. The first part is about interlockings and towers in general. And the second part is about all the specific towers that were on the Erie's New York Division in 1920. And I hope to surprise some of you with ones that you've never heard of. And then what happened to them over the years right up until today. The building and the function, more the function. I just want to say I never worked for a railroad, and I never got paid to work in any towers. I have kind of worked towers under a friend's supervision occasionally back in the 80s. And I have been in a lot of the towers, and I've been in, for example, I was going to use the example of Grove Street, Erie, which I had been in I believe, 1958. So my time goes back quite a bit, and I've been in a ton of them and learned a lot about them. Nevertheless, there are going to be folks on here that certainly will know some facts that I may not know. And if you want to bring up some things either in the chat feature or as questions and comments at the end, that would be great. So, hope this is interesting to the body here. Okay, here's a classic Erie interlocking tower. You're probably all familiar with Ridgewood Junction at the west end of the Bergen County Railroad coming back into the main line. It was closed in 1986, but still stands in good condition, the best condition probably of any of the concrete block towers on the New York Division. So here were the glory days of interlocking towers on the Erie, and I've kind of picked 1920 as a talking point here. And the reason I say this here, almost all Erie towers which would ever exist were opened by 1920, so 100 years ago. That was also the year that the USRA returned control to the railroads for whatever that affects. These towers were local towers. They were only controlling operations in their immediate area. So they didn't remotely control some other place. That was it. And in most cases, they could see their whole interlocking plan out the window. And one of the reasons for that was that the mechanical interlockings, Armstrong interlockings, which I say many of them started out as, had to have a pipe connection to the switches and signals, so they couldn't control anything too far away. Okay, these were local towers again. Now, why had most of them been built and opened by now? Well, they started building the towers and opening them in the 1890s, maybe even a little earlier. But then they did some major upgrades. And so one of them, of course, was the Graham Line was built. These were in the 1908, 1910 era. Graham Line was built. What happened there? It caused them to have to open a flock of new towers. So H.M. Highland Mills, the Graham Line had to divert from the Newburgh in New York. So they had to have a tower in their view. Moodna Viaduct. Well, the Graham Line was double track, but the Moodna Viaduct only had single track. So how did they want to control and regulate the double track to single at one end and going back to double at the other end? And the answer is that they put a tower, BS, it was really a ground level shack, but we'll call it a tower, on the east end of the viaduct. And they operated it, 24 hours a day for a long time. So that was part of opening the Graham Line. M.Q. Campbell Hall. Well, the Montgomery branch went through Campbell Hall before the Graham Line, but here comes along the Graham Line and crosses the Montgomery branch at 90-degree angle. So for lots of reasons, they put a tower there. And FX Graham, well, at the other end, I'm sorry, you may be able to see this better than me. There's GD Howells Junction, where the Graham line and the main line came alongside each other, didn't really connect, although they had switches, but then they went off on their separate ways. The main line over Otisville Summit, if you want to call it that, and the Graham line through the Otisville Tunnel. But then in Graham, or Guymard, some people call it, the lines came together again, so there was a tower established, FX Graham. So all of those were caused. So by 1920, of course, they existed and operated day and night. The river line, in order to build the river line, it had a junction with the Buffalo Division at NT River Junction. A tower was built, and on the west end at CB Cuba Junction, it came back into the main line. And next and last for now, the Columbus and Erie. And they had to have towers at the east end at NE Niobe Junction and at CM Columbus Junction. So there was another example. By the way, the Erie, to me anyway, in the classic era of the Erie, always named their towers by letters. We talk about, BJ or WJ or WC or MQ. And those we refer to as the towers. Of course, they were the telegraph calls. Of course, when the towers started, the telegraph was the means of communication that was used. But also, I think that it helped them to use the letters to distinguish them from passenger stations in the same town. An example of that would be like SF Suffern. Okay, we say, oh, there's a tower, SF Suffern. Well, you know what? That's a half a mile from passenger station. So by calling it SF and not calling it Suffern, we're correctly distinguishing between the two, so we know what we're talking about. Okay, here, as I mentioned, many of the original Erie towers built in the 1890s as Armstrong towers, and then upgraded to mechanical operation, electromechanical, between 1901 and 1920. Other towers were newly built as electromechanical towers in the time period. I don't have details on this kind of thing, but I think that most of the towers that were built because of the new lines that were opened were electromechanical, because the technology then existed. We'll get to that on the next page. So a large network of towers was economical to operate in 1920. Wages were relatively low, and staffing was helped by a 6-day work week. Also, on some railroads, and I think on the Erie, up to a certain point, operators and dispatchers could work 12-hour shifts. So what difference did that make? That meant that to run an interlocking tower 24 hours a day, you only needed 2 guys, not 3. And also they were available 6 days a week. So you only had 2 relief shifts. So it was really easy for the railroad management to operate towers like that. So the building cost was a one-time thing, and the wages at that time were low. Also, the technology of 1920 didn't permit easy remoting of the interlocking function, so you couldn't just close the next tower and put a machine in a tower. Okay, so what's an interlock? An arrangement of switches, signals, and related devices that permits operator control from a specific point and makes conflicting movements and other unsafe or undesirable events impossible. So the area controlled is called the interlocking plant, runs from the home signals where trains enter to specific points where they exit the plant, or maybe to an end of track. Besides switches and signals, there's other devices. There's derails, bridge locks, movable frogs, smash boards, not so much on the Erie, but elsewhere, traffic levers. Almost all interlockings in 1920 were controlled from the second floor of a 2-story tower. However, at a later time, some local interlockings were moved to the first floor of a nearby passenger station for efficiency of manpower, of course. The best examples are Great Notch, Goshen, and Port Jervis. So interlocking technology was developed in England in the 1850 era, and the first installation in the United States was in 1875. So they were here. And of course, Saxby and Farmer is the famous British firm that manufactured a lot of the goods. And I believe we imported a lot of that equipment to build the interlocking towers here in the first place. So all original interlockings were mechanical. They pushed and pulled on rodding going from the second floor down, out the first floor, and extending to turnouts, track switches, and devices to be controlled. Could be derails, could be bridge locks, whatever. I use the word turnout to distinguish from electrical switch. So that meant the interlocking plant couldn't extend too far. Very early on, and this was a little more British, rods also ran to semaphore signals, which were lit via lanterns at dusk. But soon after, the signals were converted to electric operation. That was a lot easier than electrifying the switches at first. It was a simpler thing, you know, the light bulb, or possibly a semaphore motor. As technology advanced, turnouts could also be operated by electric motor. Armstrong levers were sometimes left in place to control them, but pulling or pushing the Armstrong levers simply operated an electric switch. The first US installation of interlocked electrified turnouts was in 1901, which is why I don't believe that any Erie towers were converted before 1901 from Armstrong to electromechanical. Maybe 1902 or 3 they started. Obviously, the railroad industry in the United States is tremendously communicated very well, between railroads as far as technology, and shared their technology. And they might have competed on business, but not on technology. And a few interlocking towers had such a high train volume and required fast turnout throwing. They were made electro-pneumatic. So electric wasn't fast enough. It had to be by air. And so electrical controls operated air valves, and there were compressors, obviously, to throw the turnouts. That was on the Erie New York Division, I believe only Jersey City Terminal Tower, Grove Street, and BR Croxton. This is a little illustration of the rods coming out the front of a tower, and they'll turn 90 degrees to be parallel to the tracks, all by various linkages. Then here's a picture on the right there, and as you see rods coming down parallel to the tracks to reach the turnouts or the other devices they control. That's actually East Stroudsburg, so I cheated a little. It's not on the Erie, sorry. Now, to show you the levers and the model board at SF Suffern, you can see the levers and also the model board. It's a track diagram, a lot of white lines you see up in the to the upper left. There was a color coding for the levers. Red for signals in this case. It might have been different in different towers or in electromechanical towers. But anyway, red here were for signals, black were for turnouts, and white were for turnout locks. Forward position of the levers toward the tracks, most of them, in other words, toward the windows, was considered the normal position. And the pulled out position was considered reverse. So you say, what is a turnout lock? Well, the Armstrong towers originally, it wasn't good enough to throw the switch because the switch or switches might not make absolute close enough contact. The points might not be touching the rail where they're supposed to. So that would cause a derailment. So after the switch was thrown, there was a mechanical switch lock, which I believe gripped the point and the stock rail together and made sure that they stayed put. So you had to do that also before you could get a signal over that switch to make sure it stayed in place passing train didn't somehow pick the points and derail. And so even though all these levers in Suffern seem to be normal, that means the switches were straight through, all the signals were at stop. Nevertheless, they've locked the position of those normal switches. They kind of leave them that way if they're going to leave the switches in normal. Okay, how were the switches and signals, etc., interlocked? Originally, it was mechanical. The levers were connected to rods passing through a locking bed. There was a system of small moving metal rods allowing a blockage of any movement of turnouts or clearings. It allowed movements which were safe and blocked those which were not safe. So obviously there were a lot of signal engineers employed on the railroad in the early days and still. And the signal engineers designed all of these interlockings with lots of drawings. And they not only designed the levers and so forth, but they also designed the locking mechanism. And then other people would build the locking mechanisms to the specifications of the signal engineer, who would then supervise the installation and do a thorough testing before the interlocking went into service. So when electrical interlockings came in, then some of the towers used electrical relays, which is why it would be usually located on the first floor of the tower. So that might be a different way of interlocking. You'll find that on the first floor of towers. And nowadays, if you still visit any or there's any, open for inspection and so forth, the relays will still be in place, all those electrical relays. An old system, before we had so-called solid state electronics. So the non-Armstrong towers built later on are older ones. Older towers converted from Armstrong, used control levers sometimes with large pistol grip or smaller handles, which pull out or push in, or levers which moved left or right. You'll see that in a minute in a couple of pictures here. So this one is Jersey City Terminal Tower interior. So this one, levers were used which had left and right positions for turnouts and left center right positions for signals. So you can see those levers, you're facing them, and some of them are to the left and a couple of them to the right, and some of them are center. You notice some of them go up, some of them go down. That was so they could get a lot of levers in, and they didn't have to build the machine or the tower too long. So it's sort of efficient for the left and right. So again, left and right for turnouts. Left is normal, right is reverse. Normal means usually straight through. Reverse means sort of like a diverging movement. I didn't mention before, and I want to make sure I mention that in almost all interlockings, probably I guess I could say all interlockings, any crossover, which is two switches connecting two main tracks, would be one single lever. Because if you can't fit a train or some parked cars in between the two mains, then they do it with a single lever, because it would be, part of the concept of interlocking is you wouldn't want to throw one switch without the other. That would create a mess. Okay, so left for switches is normal, right is reverse. Now, what about the signals? Okay, left means that the train is cleared to move to the left on the diagram, the model board. Right means that the train will get a signal to move to the right on the model board. And center, straight up and down, means the signal's at stop. I'll explain that a little better in another diagram that I'm going to show you. I just commented, you see a couple of guys sitting around there, and I don't know what they're doing, but must be a lull. But the volume of train movements in Jersey City Terminal Tower and some others required at one time a train director and one or more levermen on each trip. And the director would call out the moves, but not move the levers. The director usually also was the operator that was a communication with the dispatcher.
Hey, Jeff?
Yes.
Can I pause you for a second? We got a couple questions in the chat. I'll read to you because I guess it's
okay, sure. Whenever you think it's good. Yeah.
First is actually a comment by Bill Shepard. He said that operators belong to the Order of Railroad Telegraphers.
Okay.
Question from Dennis Picker. I doubt that they had anything like backup generators in the 1920s when the tower lost power and electrical interlocking plant was out of service. Did they have some sort of Armstrong backup to keep things going during a power outage?
I would say absolutely not. No. For example, no, I can think of a thing. For example, if you're talking about electrical turnouts, track switches, right? They can send the maintainer out to unlock the switch and throw the switch manually and to give hand signals. So I wouldn't call it so much a backup as they had procedures that they could follow in that emergency, but they were really cumbersome procedures.
They might have had battery backup.
Yeah, they might have, but we were just talking about that, weren't we? I mean, somebody said that there weren't any backups, electrical backups. Well, you
I'm
know,
not sure the battery would have enough current required to support it for more than a few minutes. Next
I think they had pretty big battery cells near electrical interlockings for just that reason.
Okay.
Okay.
Next question from Ed Olszewski. Are those signal tower pictures up on the walls indicators of the actual signal position? You may want to go back and look at the picture to see what he's referencing there.
Yeah, I don't know. Like that?
I think go forward one. Go forward one more. Those in the back there. Nope, go back. There you go. Over the window.
Oh yes.
Top.
Okay. Yeah, semaphores. It certainly looks like it. I didn't look into this in that detail. Sorry. It certainly looks like those are, because what we can say for sure was that in the original Jersey City, there were all semaphore signals. There were high semaphore signals and there were some dwarf signals. Absolutely. I would say
well,
yes.
We have the answers. The next comment is from Jim Mardugan, and I'll observe right now that there are at least 3 former EL tower operators on this call right now. I saw Rich Panisi's out there, Jim Mardugan, and Bill Shepard. Jim says those semaphores indicate occupancy to the terminal's train shed, or occupancy in the terminal's train shed.
Good.
That's what those indicate. And the last question from Art Way: did they have teletype orders? Did they have teletype orders to the tower?
Not in the early days. I mean, later there was teletype, and later there was fax, but not in the early days. Okay. I mean, what they had was telegraph. I mean, they were on the dispatcher circuit.
And that's the last question for now.
Okay. I think we were still in Jersey City, and we had a train departing from about track 8 or so here. I don't know. And I believe you could see that out the window of Terminal Tower. Okay, this is the Waldwick Tower model board. And this shot is from the old days, the glory days, I guess. But actually, the board has been restored to the renovated tower. We're going to come to that again at the end here. But there is the board. And what happens in these things, it looks to me though, that this board was photographed after. It looks to me like this board was photographed after the number of tracks was reduced, because we see that there were not 4 tracks.
Yeah, can you hold on 1 second? Can everyone go on mute, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know what's causing that. Anyway, what they did in the towers in these model boards, instead of making a new model board when the tracks were reduced or changed, they tended to put black electrical tape over the tracks that didn't exist anymore. So if they were white originally, then they would put black tape over the tracks that had been taken out. So this is kind of what happened there. So here's the original model board, but it's been modified for a change of trackage. And the charts below there are the manipulation charts that show what order the operator should use to operate the levers to set a specific route and run a train. Then I was going to talk about these glass jars a little bit. In the Armstrong and the earlier electromechanical towers, if you cleared a train, like it gave them a green signal, and then you wanted to take it away from him and he hadn't reached the signal yet, you could put back the lever, at least partway, but you had to run a timer, and the timer would run for 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, depending on the signal engineer's judgment of how long they needed to run. And that was so that the engineer could stop. Because, if you had a clear signal and the train was like 1 minute away and you threw it red in his face and he put the train in emergency, he could not stop. So he would go into the interlocking. And so certainly you wouldn't want to be throwing switches into a different position at that point that were not expected to be. So they had to operate these timers, and the timers would run for X minutes. And at the conclusion of that thing, if the train hadn't taken the signal yet, it would have already gone to red, but you can then unlock the route, and you can then throw switches and make a different route, clear the signal again, or whatever you're trying to do. So those are timers. And they had different ones pertaining to different signals. Like in this case, I can see that the one on the left is 1, 2, 3, and then the next one's 4, 5, 6. That corresponds to levers in the Waldwick Tower. So if you wanted to set a timer so you could put signal 1, lever 1, 2, or 3 back to stop, you'd use that one. If you wanted to do 4, 5, 6, you'd use another one. That was because the different ones had different time requirements. Also, this could be going on in a big interlocking. You could be running a couple of different timers at once. Okay, anyway. Now, this was the Waldwick levers. And the levers were not the large levers. These were not the gun kind. These were small levers. And they were in and out. So most of them are in here, but I see one over on the right that's pulled out. So then there's the 2 tin cans there. They're also red, so they're hard to see. But in the kind of the center of the picture, there are 2 red devices that are over levers. And those are called blocking devices. And those are used when a track is, for example, out of service for maintenance, or a switch is out of service for maintenance, and you should not clear a train over them. So that's to remind the operator not to try to pull them. He can't just make a mistake and pull them. So when you give a track over for closed for service, or a switch to a maintainer to repair, you put these things on. You don't take them off until the workmen release the track or the switch or whatever. Okay, now I drew a little thing on an example of a model board to show you how the levers are numbered. Okay, so, and there are two examples here. This is the first one. This is an example of levers that pull out or push in. So they only have two positions. So I have a pretend simplified junction here where there's a main line running east and west. There's a tower and there's a single track, they're double track main. There's a single track branch line. Okay, now 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7 are signals. 3 and 4 are switches, turnouts. 3 is actually 2 switches because it's a crossover. Okay, so now you can see that would be how you would do this. Like if you were going to go from west to east on the main line, you clear signal 1. If you're going from east to west on the same track on the wrong main, you clear 6. Okay, if you wanted to operate a train from the west into the branch line, you'd first throw your switch 4 reverse so that it would be a diverging movement setup. Then you would clear signal 1 and it would the train would come from the west. It would pass signal 1. It would go on to the branch line and off to the east. So I think that's fairly simple, but we're going to contrast it with the next diagram. Okay, this was the situation if it was decided to use those left and right levers, not push in, pull out. So these levers go left and right or center. So now the same exact track diagram, the same switches 3 and 4, but now lever 1 can have 2 positions, right or left. And right means the train goes toward the right on the model board. The model board also is hung in the tower so that it's the same direction as the tracks. So the lever, the model board, and the trackage are all oriented the same. It would be too confusing any other way for the operator. Okay, so if you want to run a train from the west to the east on the main line, you clear 1R, you push it over to the right. And then after the train passed, you restore that lever to the center position, which would be stop. If you had a train coming from the east and it was on the wrong main and it wanted to go on the westbound main, so it would come from the right, you would give it signal 1L, which means you would take lever 1 and push it to the left. He would get the signal, he would go straight through, and then you'd restore that to the center. And then if you wanted to come off the branch, obviously you'd throw switch 4 first, because you can't throw a switch after you've cleared the signal over it. That's part of what's interlocked. So you'd throw switch 4 diverging, then you could, if you're going to cross over also 3, you'd throw that. And when you're done setting your route, you would clear 5L. And if you looked at lever 5, they would have set it up so that it went to the left and it went to the center, but it wouldn't go to the right. You know, they would put something in the way so that it would be blocked, so you wouldn't make a mistake like that. It wouldn't do anything, but they pretty much took care of things like that. Okay, so that's the difference. The other thing, I don't have a slide about this, but just to comment, the general rule about the interlockings was you're supposed to keep all of the signals at stop. And the reason you were supposed to do that was you didn't want a train coming to you and going past a signal that was cleared when you didn't have the route lined up for that particular train, So you kept them all at stop unless you had a movement which was imminent. Usually the movements coming were announced by the next tower down or possibly by the dispatcher. But after that train passed, it would so-called knock down the signal. The signal would go back to stop. You were supposed to restore your lever again to the stop position. Okay, But in some towers where there was a higher volume of trains and there were going to be several movements, one following the other, like in rush hour, they had fleeting set up. So fleeting would mean you could have a fleet of trains going by. That's why they use that word. And there was an extra lever, basically, which allowed the signal to be fleeted. So now it would stay clear after a train moved through, and after that train got far enough away, occupied another block or two down, that signal would go. Sometimes it would go to approach, and then the next time it would go to the next block the train ahead went, the signal would go to clear. And they would do that by themselves. But you had to be very careful when you fleeted the signals that you didn't have a branch line train or a train making a different movement sneaking up on you, because he'd get the same signal. So had to use that with caution, that feature. Okay, where were the interlockings located? Major passenger terminals, junction with secondary lines and with other railroads, especially at grade. Movable bridges over waterways, entrances to major passenger or freight yards or railroad shops, locations where there were controlled crossovers needed or where the number of main tracks changed. And for many interlockings, there was a combination of those factors. Where were the interlock? Okay, same question. Of course, interlockings were only installed where there was a significant volume of trains and you wanted to have an efficient, quick movement through the area. Interlocking operators, usually also train order operators or telegraphers, who delivered train orders as needed and, of course, OS the trains to the dispatcher. Places that didn't require interlockings might have switch tenders, or the switches would be left to operate by the train crews. Few examples: major passenger terminals, Jersey City Terminal Tower, junction with secondary lines. I just put BJ for the Erie Main Line in Bergen County split. Goshen GP, Pine Island, and Montgomery branches coming into the main line. Crossings on the Greenwood Lake, Pompton Junction, Erie and Susquehanna, Mountain View, Lackawanna and Erie. Movable bridges over waterways, Hackensack River, HX on the Main and DB on the Greenwood Lake. Passaic River, BE on the Main, WR on the New York and Greenwood Lake. And entrances to freight yards. There's plenty of examples, but I just used WX Sparrowbush, which was the west end of the Port Jervis yard, right by the Mill Rift Bridge. Okay, here's something I found in my small amount of research here. It's the Erie list of telegraph calls of October 1st, 1921. This is available online to everybody, for free. It's just there. And it has all telegraph offices whatsoever on the whole railroad, but the ones that are interlocked have asterisks. So I found that a helpful reference to put against other sources of information. So anybody that's interested in this kind of thing, you should either look that up or maybe even print it out. You can refer to it if you like. Now we're going to get to sort of the second part of the program, which is an interlocking listing on the Erie's New York Division as of 1920, and some information as to what happened to them, and a few more views of the towers, of course.
Hey, Jeff, we got one
yes.
question here.
Sure, go ahead.
From Mike Sly. Sorry if this seems picky. Rod is an incorrect term for the connections out to the turnout points and
pipes are better.
These are actually pipes.
Pipes. Okay.
And actually, I have a question regarding those.
That's true. About. Yeah.
Those pipes, you always see them. They're always just rusty out in the elements. Were they ever lubricated to make the Armstrong throwing a bit easier?
Yes, that was a regular job of the maintainer.
Okay, I never see any oil anywhere on them. I see rust. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Well, lubricate the pipes and the switches, of course. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that
Okay.
was one of the reasons. And originally, obviously, not only every tower had a maintainer, but some of them had 2 shifts or 3 shifts of maintainers in the real sensitive areas. So yes.
I'll throw in one of the question I had regarding, you briefly point out the manipulation charts that
Yes.
all Erie track charts seem to have on them. First of all, I believe one of the reasons they were there is because the levers have to be thrown in a specific order, so as to keep the interlocking stuff working correctly. So
See, okay. First of all, I don't agree that all the towers had it. I would say half or more, yes. But the other point that you're making, which is this. You take this thing, let's say you want to establish a route from the branch line east to the main line west, okay? So you have to, assuming that 3 and 4 are normal, you have to throw them both, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, if I were writing a manipulation chart, I would say you'd throw 4 and then 3, and then you'd throw 5L. But I don't think that the interlocking actually requires that. I think you could throw 4 and 3 in either order. Just that you have to throw the signal last.
Okay.
So what I'm saying, yeah, I've seen a lot of those manipulation charts. I'm not sure they all used them. And when I've seen people training other people, I never saw them do it through telling you to look at the manipulation chart. You know, it was pretty much got to be common sense after a while if you knew what the devices were.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, sure. And sometime, depending on the appetite of the group and so forth, you know, maybe in another year or something, if anybody would like a presentation, I can do one on, you know, the rest of the Erie also. New York Division was tower heavy, but there were plenty of other towers, plenty of interesting towers. Anyway, okay. JC Jersey City Terminal Tower, we know pretty much about that. GS Grove Street, of course, controlled crossovers between the mains and some yard entrances. OS Tower, Monmouth Street in Jersey City was on the lower level. Grove Street was on a higher level because it was going slightly upgrade coming out of Jersey City toward the archways. So the tracks were gaining elevation gradually to go through the archways at a higher level. OS was on kind of the street level, ground level. And OS controlled things like the track coming out of the Bergen Tunnel, the Weehawken branch, and lots of yard operations down on the lower level there. BR Croxton. Croxton was the place where, first of all, a line went off to connect with the northern branch, railroad westbound there. But also it was the last place of crossovers for the Greenwood Lake versus the main line, because then the 2-track Greenwood Lake separated from the 2-track main line. It was also the place to put the trains onto the proper tracks to go through the archways to Jersey City. So I read recently, and maybe some of our gentlemen on the call can help with this too, that all 4 tracks were reversible at one time between Croxton and Jersey City, which was a tremendous help for rush hour when they were so busy. And also there were traffic levers in each tower of those towers, Jersey City Terminal, Grove Street, and Croxton, which had to be set in the same direction in order to run a train. In other words, if track 1 was going to be westbound Jersey City to Grove Street, it also had to be westbound from Grove Street to Croxton, and Croxton had to accept it as a westbound track. So I believe that there were traffic levers in all 3 towers, and that there was a procedure done if they wanted to change traffic, like who was going to call who, and they had to do it simultaneously or in a certain order. I don't know the exact details, but that's the flavor. Okay, the next tower would be on the main line we're going, HX Hackensack River Drawbridge, which controlled the west end of Croxton Yard, coming onto the main line, going across the Hackensack River, and then splitting into 4 tracks, of which the 2 were Bergen County mains, 3 and 4, they call them, and 2 were main line, 1 and 2. Okay, the next tower was HB, New Jersey and New York Junction. I believe they got HB from the words Hackensack Branch, because the New Jersey and New York, the lower part, at one time was referred to as the Hackensack Branch. And that was there, I believe, until the 30s. That was one of the first ones that was remoted, and it was remoted into HX, which was very logical. BJ Rutherford Junction, which was where the main line and the Bergen County separated, and most trains went straight through there. But a Bergen County train that in the good old days that made the Rutherford station stop had to cross over, because the Rutherford platforms in the old days were only on the main line side. There were no platforms on the Bergen County side. BE Passaic Park Drawbridge, you'll hear more about right here. BE Passaic Park is a steam operated bridge, and the operator had to be a qualified steam engineer or whatever, pass some other exam, and they worked up in that cabin on top there, controlled the signals and the bridge unlock and the bridge opening and closing, of course. This was one of the things, getting rid of this, in 1963, was one of the things that motivated the railroad to get rid of the track at Passaic. They wanted to get rid of this bridge and not do any more maintenance on it, which was understandable. I'm sure it was expensive and difficult. Okay, continuing with the main line, the next tower is CG in Passaic. But the only reference I ever found to this was on that telegraph list. Every other tower I'm talking to you about, I know something else about, and it's substantiated. But this one may have existed or may have only been planned. But if it existed, it only existed in the 20s, because very short time, Okay, the next tower is XW Patterson, otherwise known as Newark Junction, at one time. In the 20s, it was called Newark Junction. So that was the place where the Newark branch came into the main line. The main line separated into 2 parts. The main line itself, which was bridged the streets in Patterson, and the station was on the upper level, and a 4-track lower level substation in Patterson, which I imagine many people would know about. XW also controlled the lead to the Madison Avenue or Getty Avenue yard, passenger yard, turntable, etc. WJ Ridgewood Junction we talked about before. WC Waldwick was originally 4 tracks went straight through there, but there were crossovers and an entrance to a yard and a Y. And by the way, the east entrance to the Y, to the yard, was controlled by WC. The west end was hand thrown, even then, I believe, and was always hand thrown as it is today. The next tower is R. Ramsey. Ramsey existed, it probably didn't exist after the 20s. There were crossovers between all of the mains, and but I believe they were only in what I'd call the trailing point direction for westbound trains. I don't know any reason why they would have had a tower in Ramsey except for just possible flexibility of trains, changing mains. And also there were a few trains that ended their run in Ramsey, and instead of proceeding to Suffern Yard, went back to Waldwick Yard. So in doing that, they could actually cross over to the eastbound mains in Ramsey and go down the 2 stops back to Waldwick. SF Suffern, we know, is the end of the 4 tracks, the entrance to the Suffern passenger yard, the Hilburn freight yard, the junction with the Piermont branch, and all those good things. Here's a picture of XW. This is from 1960, so it doesn't have long to live because it's going to close in 63. It's a westbound train coming off the Newark branch. Of course, we don't know if it's going to terminate on the lower level, 4-track lower level station at Patterson or continue to Waldwick, in which case it'll cross over to the westbound main. Mainline tracks are to the left, and the Madison or Getty Avenue yard is in the center. Here is Suffern. It's in the thruway shadow here, so this picture was taken after 55, as you see. So the tower was constructed right over, the thruway was constructed right over the tower, and there were large timber props in the back. You've probably seen this, and the Ford plant track ran in back of the tower. Okay, another list here, Suffern to Sparrowbush on the main line, S.J. Sterlington. There were crossovers. There was a center siding that served both mains, but then there was a junction with a Sterling mine type railroad that went across Route 17 and into the iron mines. XK West Tuxedo, I think would be about a mile west of the Tuxedo station, not right at the station. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, that there might have been 3 main tracks from there to NJ Newburgh Junction. So then the next one, I don't know much about XK, and it closed fairly early. NJ Newburgh Junction, of course, was the one that controlled the junction between the main line and the Graham line. And originally, though, it controlled the junction between the main line and the Newburgh and New York Railroad, also known as the Newburgh Shortcut. So NJ was there before the Graham line. That was not built after 1908. That would have existed in the 1890 era. And of course, there's a Y west of that, a connection between the lines. GB Greycourt, which is crossovers and the junction, the Newburgh branch, and also the interchange with the Lehigh in New England. Excuse me, Lehigh and Hudson River, sorry. Okay, then the GP Goshen. In 1920, this was a tower. It was about maybe a half a mile west of the passenger station, more like where the Pine Island branch comes into the main line. And so I'm just looking at a note here. We believe that it was moved in 1949 into the station, and which was then called GN. So now at that point, the station operator would have a small machine in the station controlling the same functions that were in the tower. But from the 1890s until about 1949, GP was an active tower. XM Middletown was at the just west of the Middletown passenger station at the first grade crossing. And I believe that controlled crossovers on the main and obviously a lead into the Middletown yard. And it was also functioned as the grade crossing tower, as some of the interlocking towers did. MS Middletown Summit didn't live too long, but the purpose of that, I believe, at the time when all freight ran on the main line, they used helpers sometimes to get up over Middletown Summit. So it was a place to attach and detach helpers. It was also the junction with a short branch into the Middletown State Hospital there, which got a tremendous amount of coal. Next one was GD Howells Junction. So that even though the Graham line and the main line ran separately through there, they did have crossovers. And at one time in the 20s, they were power crossovers and controlled locally. That, however, they did very few crossover moves. And that was one of the first offices to ever be remoted into the dispatcher's office. That's different than the other things. They didn't remote much into the dispatcher's office, but Howes Junction was remoted there. FX Graham, when you came down from Otisville on the main line and you met the Graham line, and then the tracks interconnected. So there were two main line tracks, two Graham line tracks, and that became 3 tracks from Graham to Port Jervis. So FX controlled that. That was a tower. I'm just looking at my notes here. About late 40s, I believe it was closed as a tower, and they put in a spring switch on the westbound move to go from 4 to 3 tracks, the main line and Graham line. And they had what they called supervisory control from Port Jervis, from the station, PO office, which controlled, basically could choose to set the signals at stop or not. Basically, the switch itself was a spring switch. Then in 54, they closed Otisville. So they stopped running the main line there, so they didn't even need that spring switch anymore, because there was no westbound main line track, or eastbound for that matter, going through Otisville. Next one was BC Port Jervis, the East End. There was a tower there at one time. And the next one was WX Sparrowbush. PO was not, in the Port Jervis station, was not originally an interlocking. WX Sparrowbush would have been the last interlocking on the main line on the New York Division. And I put a picture of Port Jervis Station, which became an interlocking office, not in 1920, but let me see if I have an estimate date down for that. I think that was also in the 40s. Both of those things, they remoted WX Sparrowbush's functions to the Port Jervis station, and they put in that supervisory control at Graham, the same thing. So PO had a small machine. This is a photo of the Sparrowbush machine that was installed in Port Jervis. It's not the Sparrowbush interlocking that was in Sparrowbush, but the one that was put in. And most of this equipment was made by either General Railway Signal or Union Switch and Signal. Those are the big suppliers of interlocking gear, signal gear, and so forth in the States here. Control was moved, small machine was used. On this machine, Port Jervis is to the left, the Delaware Division is on the right, so you can see the tracks coming out of each yard and joining the main line there and going west. Bergen County Railroad, BJ Rutherford Junction, we've already discussed. BT Colberg Junction, there was a tower at one time at the point where the connection is with the Susquehanna in Saddlebrook, called Colberg Junction because a great deal of coal was brought in there and dumped on the ground in big piles. I think most people have heard this story during the summer and other seasons, and then in the winter it would be taken away one way or the other. When the BT was closed, at that time they installed what they call the telephone train order signal, and at Colberg Junction, I believe, for the westbound movement, and it was operated by WJ Ridgewood Junction, could set that to be notify the engineer through the telephone train signal to stop and call. And then, of course, on the Bergen County Railroad, the last tower would be WJ. Graham Line, NJ Newburgh Junction, HM Highland Mills, we discussed. That probably only lasted into the 20s. But when they built the Graham Line, they thought they needed stuff there to separate the Graham Line trains in Highland Mills from the New Bergen, New York trains. BS Moodna Viaduct East End, we talked about, it was a ground level tower for many years. MQ Campbell Hall, we'll see some pictures of in a minute. GD Howells Junction, we talked about, in FX Graham. Here's MQ. This particular train is going eastbound, so it's running wrong main because if the Graham Line is double track there, which I believe it was at this time. The Erie Montgomery branch crosses the Graham Line at a 90-degree angle just to the right of the tower and just under the couplers or the rear end of the engine there. You can kind of see where it is in the grass. I think it's still there at the time of this picture. Although it was abandoned at a certain point when the Lehigh in New England was the main one using it, when they stopped using it in '61, and then a little bit later that was actually abandoned. This is the model board at MQ, and there's the, what do you call it, manipulation charts there up on the right. And you can see, I think in this diagram that the Montgomery branch is out because it looks like some black tape is over the Montgomery branch, you know, going up and down vertical line there, where it comes into the Graham Line, but then up further, it's there. So you see the Graham Line, you see the so-called Maybrook Loop, and you see the O&W bridge. And if you look on the diagram on the left there, you see the O&W kind of going under the Graham Line, which it did there. And then you see that place called JM, which is the Maybrook Junction there, kind of. And the line goes off, it's yellow toward Maybrook Yard. The Montgomery branch going further up is still in service. It's still in service today. So I don't know about that. There are some timers and there are some levers underneath there, those little tiny gold levers. And they were supposed to be controlling those switches far away up there at the O&W bridge onto the Maybrook Loop and the crossover up there between the two mains. Sorry. Something happened here. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is a picture of Campbell Hall today. I don't have much today pictures, but anyway, what's interesting here is they built the passenger platform for the Campbell Hall station in 1983 when they moved the passenger service to the Graham Line. And they built it all the way up to where the Montgomery branch used to cross. And they put a relay case exactly where the tower was. So it's just like, I don't know if they were trying to like preserve it in some small way, but, and you can see the right of way of the Montgomery branch is still clear. You can see where it ran today. And the Graham Line obviously is the only game in town nowadays. Okay, in the Newark branch, we had DB, New York and Greenwood Lake Junction, which was their Hackensack River drawbridge. So that was a big deal because it was a connection between the passenger tracks on the east side of the bridge and the third track, which went to Croxton Yard that we just had articles about quite a bit in the Diamond. And then on, it controlled the drawbridge, and then it controlled the junction between the Newark branch and the New York and Greenwood Lake mains. So very, lots of things that control the volume, trains less than the main line, of course. NX Newark drawbridge over the Passaic River, we'll see in a minute. And XW we talked about in Patterson. Here's NX. This is the tower that controlled the bridge crossing Passaic River between Kearny and Newark. It was double track. Interestingly enough, instead of having the tower operator here control the double track, they let the double track come from Jersey City and from DB all the way to the Newark station. And then they put a switch in, and that switch was actually thrown by the trainman so that they had a thing in the timetable. The first westbound Newark branch train through it for westbound moves and left it set that way. The last New York branch westbound train every night set it back to eastbound and locked it. It was not a spring switch. It was set by the train crew for some strange reason. Anyway, passenger service ended on this branch, like the Northern branch and the Caldwell branch and so forth, in 1966. But the bridge stayed in service then, or at least theoretically. But upon the Conrail takeover, the freight service, they decided they would work the branch from opposite ends, whatever customers were left, discontinue using the bridge, and it's been left in the open position ever since. Okay, the Greenwood Lake and Main and the Orange Branch Towers. DB, we just talked about. WR West Arlington was the control of the Passaic River Drawbridge, and later also Forest Hill. We'll come to that. Forest Hill had its own tower at one time, OJ, in 1920 and earlier, of course. GN, there was a tower in Great Notch. MV Mountain View, operated by Lackawanna, the tower, PJ Pompton Junction. And then there were two towers on the Orange Branch, OF Bloomfield Avenue and WG Watts Essing Junction. Wait a minute, I have pictures of some of these other ones, but OF Bloomfield Avenue was crossing Bloomfield Avenue. The reason that they had an interlocking was that there was trolley crossing. And so the trolley tracks were signaled and had derails, and of course, the Orange Branch was signaled. That tower OF also controlled the gates. Eventually the trolley was discontinued. I'm just going to give you the year reference again. That was in 1952. So the trolleys tracks were removed in 52, and that would allow OF to close. WG Watts Essing Junction closed much earlier. In fact, I'm not sure that WG was open in 1920, but it was open in the early days of the century. That was a time when the Erie Orange Branch crossed the Lackawanna Montclair Branch at grade at Watts Essing Junction. So there was a tower. Now, I believe in something like 1903. Let me see if I have a 1913. I believe in 1913 that the Lackawanna tracks were depressed, and that would allow the Erie tracks to cross over them at the normal level. And at that time, they didn't need the tower anymore for diamond crossing, so it was probably closed soon after that. But anyway, in our approximate time frame, maybe just before 1920, this tower did exist. It's a picture of West Arlington. The tower and the station, they were attached and did control the Passaic River Drawbridge. This is an eastbound train. And in the late 40s, OJ Tower at Forest Hill was closed and remoted to WR. This is 1945, the GN two-story tower at Great Notch that was on the eastbound side of the tracks was closed. Interlocking control moved to the station. They had a little machine. Telegraph call of the station was GA, so the operator then became also the interlocking operator. East is to the left here toward Jersey City, and to the right is Wenatchee Midvale or Greenwood Lake, and also Caldwell. And you can see the white there that if you look to the right and then going up, that's the Caldwell branch. If you look to the right and then the line going down, that's the Greenwood Lake Main single track west of there. Mountain View, we have a picture. This is a westbound Erie train on the Greenwood Lake single track, crossing the double track Boonton line with a Lackawanna style in the southeast quadrant of the diamond. And of course, the tower is gone and the Boonton line is gone. but there's still a track there because they connected onto the track to go to Waco and Mountain View and so forth, that they still have some small residual freight operation today. This is Pompton Junction. This picture, I believe, may be a J.E. Bailey picture, showing the tower, the guys out on the steps there, and the passenger shelter. There were actual people changing trains here all the time. And we're looking west on the Susquehanna toward the Diamond. Passenger trains change regularly here. Towers, Armstrong Tower, and we have a pipe connection, not a rod. We have a pipe connection, fortunately, probably going to the westbound home signal for the Susquehanna. New Jersey, New York. HB we talked about before, DA Oradell. Okay, DA Oradell. The reason that I know about DA and ZY best is because, and I believe it's Wilson Jones, I'm not really sure, there was a Pascack Valley book that came out about 15 or 20 years ago, which gave the details of all this, and it's very interesting. And one of the things was that the New Jersey, New York was double tracked all the way to Oradell originally. They did put a tower there. The tower certainly existed in the 20s, and it controlled the end of the double track. And it kind of went downhill from there. You know, at first it was open less shifts, and then eventually they put in a spring switch, I guess. And that tower closed about 1935. Later, the double track was moved back to Essex Street, Hackensack. And then it was moved back. The whole line became single track until they built the new line into the stadium, where there's a little bit of double track coming up from the junction. Now it's mostly single track though. There was also a tower, ZY, and it was west of the passenger station in Spring Valley, right at the road crossing there of Route 45 or Main Street. And that was sort of like the junction of the Piermont branch with the New Jersey, New York. It was also a small freight yard there. And I guess he also controlled the gates. Interestingly enough, I don't believe there was ever a tower at Nanuet Junction, although you think if they needed one at Spring Valley, they'd need one at Nanuet, but I don't believe that that's true. Northern Branch. BR Croxton, a single track connection went off from the track, the main line tracks through the archways over to the track coming out of the Bergen Tunnel, and then connected there. And then there was a tower maybe a half a mile north of there, Railroad West, called JR. JR, I guess, stands for Jersey or Jersey City, at Manhattan Avenue. This tower was also called Northern Railroad Junction. So that controlled the Erie and Erie Northern Branch and Susquehanna trains going through there, the trains coming out of the Bergen Tunnel, and the trains going into the Croxton yard from that end. That was controlled, that was closed in about the 40s. And the last tower on the Northern Branch was GR Granton Junction. And that was the Susquehanna and the Erie separating ways. Actually, there were originally, I could show you this picture next. This is Granton Junction, the shell that remains now, and you're looking at the Susquehanna track at the moment. Actually, there were 4 tracks from Lundy's Lane or JR up to Granton Junction. And the 4 tracks, they had a shared arrangement. Actually, the Erie owned the westbound tracks and the Susquehanna owned the eastbound tracks. Of course, they were the same, the Erie owned the Susquehanna until 1940 anyway. But they operated all westbounds, on the Erie tracks. and they operated all eastbounds on the Susquehanna tracks from Granton Junction east. And then they had the crossovers and so forth and the separation just west of this point that we're looking at here. Meantime, a fire in 1960 destroyed the innards of the tower. The shell is standing, I think, till this day. At that time, the connecting switches were removed and they started using the trackage as separate railroad trackage. They didn't use it jointly anymore after that. Also, I mentioned that there were 4 tracks to Granton Junction, but when they built Susquehanna Transfer, which was about 1940, when they started using those motor cars on the Susquehanna, and they built Susquehanna Transfer in 1940, the track 3, the outer westbound main, was truncated there and connected into track 1. And so there were only 3 tracks from Susquehanna Transfer to Granton Junction. Okay, there was a picture of the levers, I believe in better days before the fire there. Okay, the Weehawken branch started at OS Monmouth Street. We talked about it a little bit, and there was a tower, a New York Central West Shore tower called AV for Avenue, I guess, Willow Avenue. And the Erie, I don't know too much about the Weehawken branch, but the Erie had to pass that tower and come under the jurisdiction of that tower. I think there was a shared track arrangement for a certain number of years at that point too. The Erie had to be governed by that tower in order to get to their Weehawken yard. Newburgh branch indicates the material indicated to me that there was a interlocking at VG Valesgate Junction, might have been a tower in the very early days, but in 1920 there was. And of course, the Highland Mills and Gray Court towers are one on each of those lines, which we talked about before. Montgomery branch, GP Goshen, MQ Campbell Hall, and then there was a CH, which was an O&W tower just beyond MQ, maybe half a mile at the most, where the Erie Montgomery branch crossed the O&W, which was double track for some of the time, under the jurisdiction of an O&W tower, CH. Later, that CH was remoted into, I should say, it was moved into the O&W's Campbell Hall station. And I guess eventually, obviously, the O&W stopped operating. And I believe this is the last one of these lists. Middletown East Main Street, that's an O&W call, where the Erie trains that came out of the Middletown yard and ran east to East Main Street. Then they had to connect into the O&W track and run on trackage rights from there to Crawford Junction. We're talking about the Middletown and Crawford branch, otherwise known as the Pine Bush branch. Should have said that. Then there was another tower, which may be a mile west of Middletown O&W station, called RF Crawford Junction, where there was the junction switches, and the Erie went off there and went on to their own branch to get to Pine Bush. So those were interlockings on the New York Division, a few of them not operated by the Erie itself, but governing Erie trains. Okay, so my count of total towers in 1920, not duplicating, there were 48 local on-site towers in 1920. 43 built and operated by the Erie, 5 of them operated by other railroads we kind of just talked about. I believe the vast majority of the 48 were open 24 hours a day. Again, trains were numerous, labor was inexpensive, workers worked long shifts, and technology was still to be developed to allow them to close and still have trains pass while they were closed. So kind of if any trains were scheduled or would be going by when, they couldn't close them at all at night. Okay, Bill Shepard's book called New York Division Interlocking Stations. Bill, I believe, is on the call. So anyway, this book was published, or at least my copy, in 2001, which has complete diagrams of 27 Erie interlocking stations as they were about 1950. These stations were actually towers, except for Great Notch, now in the station, Pompton Junction, which became an automatic interlocking governed by the train's approach, not by an operator remotely or there. FX Graham had closed as a tower and had supervisory and so forth. Okay, so basically I was looking at that number. The 48 went down to approximately 27 in 1950, but we still got a lot. Okay, the only other interlocking shown as remote is Orange Junction, we talked about. These diagrams gives a full detail of trackage, signals, switches, derails, etc. Okay, the reduction. And after 1950, the remaining 27 Erie New York Division towers would all close gradually until the last one in 2002. We'll get to in a minute. You may wish to buy this book. I find it very interesting, and our Erie Lackawanna store sells it. You can buy it through the pages of the Diamond, the store pages, or at any of the shows where Jay has his sales tables, including the Hamburg show, by the way. Okay, why were the towers closed? Clearly, the cost of maintaining individual towers increased greatly in the second half of the 20th century. Given the constantly improving technology, they seem to be dinosaurs, I guess. Closing towers and consolidating functions made sense. Less towers to maintain, less operators to pay. Because, you know, if there was 2 towers could be consolidated into 1 or 3 into 1, there probably would still only be 1 operator to pay. He might make more, probably certainly would make more, but not triple. Ultimately, moving the functions into a central dispatcher's office made even more sense. That way, separate operators were not needed. The dispatchers could make decisions and put them in effect immediately without relaying them to anybody else, because the dispatchers operated the CTC or remote controls or whatever you want to call them at that point. Also, the development of reliable radio communications allowed direct contact between dispatchers and train crews, so they didn't need the volume of written train orders that they used to have and handed up to crews. So there are very few standalone towers remaining now in the US. Who's talking? Kenneth Martin.
Will be joined live here in studio by
Can somebody kill
Can everyone
him?
go on mute, please?
And then why President Obama is tweeting tonight.
No politics. Okay. I always found towers a wonderful place for fans because you could go in and visit. Most of the operators were willing to see fans because they had really enough time, and it relieved some boredom, and also to help the fans get oriented and so forth. Anyway, some towers still in the Chicago areas and towers in several locations in the country still used to control movable bridges. When were they closed? Some were closed individually when parts of lines were abandoned, passenger service reduced, etc. Some towers were closed as part of major projects. So I put down some projects that we know quite a bit about, I think. Moving the passenger service from Jersey City to Hoboken, that led to closing of Terminal Tower in BR Croxton, but a realignment, I should say, a redesign, a change of the machine completely in GS Grove Street, and a new junction called Bergen Junction was created and controlled from the Hackensack River Bridge, HX interlocking. Abandoning the trackage in Passaic and Patterson to Mountain View, that trackage, you know, through Garrett Mountain, former Lackawanna, in '63 led to closing Patterson Junction. That might have actually closed earlier. XW, it led to closing directly, and Mountain View, it led to closing directly. Ending passenger service on the branches in 66 led to closing NX drawbridge eventually. Wasn't used probably that much after that. Closing the main lane between Harriman and Middletown led to no further need for Goshen and MQ Campbell Hall interlockings, although I believe they had been closed a little bit before that point. Reducing the number of main tracks between Ridgewood and Suffolk, and this is a biggie, led to closing of 3 towers, WJ, WC, and SF. Here is the Bergen Junction panel. This was a new place on the railroad in 1956. This was a place where the Erie Main Line ran alongside the Lackawanna-Boonton line. The Erie Main Line was down at ground level. The Lackawanna-Boonton line was on a fill. So in order to get the Erie trains into Hoboken, they made a connection here. And instead of giving this to the dispatcher's office, they gave it the Bergen Junction control to HX. So there was never a tower at Bergen Junction. It was always controlled at HX. When you look at this diagram here, the left is westbound and the right is eastbound. So the 2 tracks you see going downward are actually going up a little grade to connect into the Boonton line. Moving functions to the dispatcher's office. So originally the New York Division of the Erie Dispatch was located in Jersey City Terminal, obviously. And as of 1955, the only interlockings remoted to there was BC Eastport Jervis, East OV and West OV, Otisville Tunnel, and GD Howells Junction. So BC, when it was closed, they remoted it to dispatcher. Otisville Tunnel, they single tracked. And when they single tracked it, they had to have an interlocking at each end, at the end of the double track, beginning a single or vice versa. And that was put into the dispatcher's office, but that's all. So that indicates to me that up to about 1950 or 1955, the philosophy was, yes, you can close towers, but give the work to another tower, remote it to another tower that can handle it, that's hopefully nearby. But that changed later and things started to be remoted directly to dispatcher's office. Also, there was no appetite in 1955 to remote stuff to the Erie dispatcher in Jersey City, because guess what? They were going to demolish Jersey City and move the dispatchers to Hoboken. And they would have had to do that whether the Erie and Lackawanna merged or not, because the whole Jersey City was going to be demolished. So naturally, they didn't want to put any interlockings or controls into Jersey City at that point. So sometime in the late 50s, the Erie dispatching function was moved to Hoboken. As each project listed on that previous slide, except the move to Hoboken, was carried out, interlocking controls still needed were moved to the dispatcher's office. The other ones, I was talking about ones like XW and Patterson and Mountain View and so forth. Okay, and then of course, Erie Lackawanna had the dispatchers on the 2nd floor of Hoboken Terminal for several years. And then later, the Meadowlands Maintenance Facility was built in Kearney, adjacent to the former Lackawanna Morrison Essex main line. Still later, the dispatcher's office was moved there. I believe that's where it resides today. Few last towers. Last Armstrong Tower in service was SF Suffolk, closed in '86 as part of that project to reduce the main tracks from 4 to 3 from Ridgewood Junction to Walwick and 2 Walwick to Suffolk and beyond. Probably the last Armstrong Tower in service on the eastern lines at all was DV Falconer outside of Jamestown. And then State Line Tower was closed in 2000. That's sort of a different ball game, although it served the Erie. Last tower in service anywhere in the former Erie lines, which had local control, was DB New York and Greenwood Lake Junction, closed in 2002 September of 2002, upon completion of the Montclair connection. It was located in a small one-story cabin adjacent to the site of the original two-story tower. That cabin was on the land, although the bridge controls were on the bridge, and that operator had to go onto the bridge to operate the bridge also. I had the honor of stopping by on the last day of service and also took a ride on the bridge on that day. So it was interesting. So that was a legitimate local tower that controlled nothing beyond its area, wasn't controlled by anybody else. It was not, though, the original tower. It was a building that they found and repurposed. The only tower buildings still standing in our territory are HX Hackensack Bridge, BJ Rutherford Junction, WJ Ridgewood Junction, and WC Waldwick, plus GR Granton Junction in derelict condition. And here is WC Waldwick Tower. The local guys have done a wonderful job restoring this. And as I said, they've even put the model board back in the tower. And I believe it's open one Sunday a month to visitors and will be open on August 28th if anybody wants to visit. And if you want some other dates, look at their Facebook page and should indicate some contact information and when they're open. And the last, I think this is the last slide. When I was preparing this thing, it came to my attention that there was a tower tribute done, the July issue of Rail Fan and Railroad. It's amazing the timing. And in this were quite a few articles by Art Erdman, one of our members. I'm not sure if he's on the call. It tells you a lot about the towers and about some particular things that happened. And if you're not a subscriber to this, I recommend you order a back issue from White River Productions. They have some available, and get them while they do. So questions and comments are welcome. So Paul, what else we got?
Okay, we have quite a few here. I'll start from the one that came in furthest out. From Jeff Van Wagenen, he observed that there was also a traffic lever in HX as well. You were talking about passing.
If there was, it probably maybe BJ had a traffic lever, because there are basically two types of traffic levers. In a very big interlocking, you can have a single tower traffic lever which controls the flow, where there's multiple areas of that interlocking. But most of them that we're talking about on the Erie are between two towers. So that would mean if there was one in HX, there would also been one in BJ, to say that the tracks were reversible between those two.
Okay. Comment from Jim Jarofsky. I think this goes back to the Ramsey Tower.
Yes.
He said, someone once told me that the Erie sometimes used helpers from Ramsey to Suffern in the Camelback days, pre-282 and Berks. Might be just a guess.
Good.
Next comment from Dan McFadden. I understand a route not being changed in front of a moving train, but would not there sometimes be a unique circumstance where you might need to throw a stop in front of a moving train?
Well, so the answer is, if you put the signal back, your lever, it would throw a stop in front of the moving train. It's just that it would not, throwing the lever back alone would change the signal to red or the semaphore to stop. It just wouldn't allow you to immediately change the switches. So if the train slid by the signal, he would still be able to go through on the route that was lined up. So you can always throw the signal to red, yes.
Okay. Observation from Joe Meyer. This is responding to Dan's comment. There shouldn't be, I think some home signals were kept at stop routinely and only cleared if all opposing or conflicting movements were locked out and the timer run. Then they could clear the home signal. If you have a clear home signal, you own the route through the plant. I think. Happy to hear the right answer if I'm wrong. So,
well, I guess what he says is true. Although keep in mind that many interlockings had parallel moves going on, so that one guy might have a route through the plant and so might another, but a different route.
Comment from Bill Shepard, received about $3 an hour to work at DB Tower in 1965.
Okay.
So times have changed. From Mike Sly, use of timetable and train order signals allowed some closing of towers. Wait, use of TTO signals.
Telegraphic train orders, telegraph train orders, telephone, I'm sorry, telephone train order signals.
Telephone train order. Okay. Thank you for that. Use of TTO signals allowed some closing of towers from about 1920 and later.
Yeah, the only one I know of that had anything to do with that in this territory is BT Colberg Junction.
And
But
there's
I
also one in Port Jervis too, I think.
Yes, I think so too.
Had a TTO signal. And the last remark is from Ron Smith. He said, I have to bail early morning tomorrow. Thanks for a great presentation. So the floor is open to anyone on the call. You want to chime in with questions for Jeff? Feel free to unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Well, I would like to, since we have some of the fellows on the call, I would like to hear about how they did the traffic levers between the towers, like did Jersey City and Grove Street or Grove Street and Croxton, how they communicated with each other to throw traffic levers. If anybody would like to, or Rich, you're there, Rich.
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm not familiar with how the Erie side worked. I'm mostly worked the Lackawanna side. Lackawanna
okay.
side, you push the button to the, like Dover to Denville. You push the button, the whistle went off to Denville to change traffic lever and release the lever to me, and I would be able to have change traffic that way.
That's very helpful. And I was thinking that that whole thing from Milburn to Newark, the middle track was reversed every day, wasn't it? The one
Yes.
direction in the morning, one at night. So there must have been a procedure. There were several towers at one time, like South Orange and so forth.
Right. But at the end, it was just between Summit and Roseville Avenue.
Okay.
Oh, this is Dick Wenzel. I recommend you ask Jim Gorowski about the DB bridge controls, which I believe he told me were both located on the bridge. And he worked there, so he ought to know.
I think he's on the call. I'm not sure if he
Oh,
dropped
he
off or
is.
not.
Everybody here worked DB. Come on, Bill, Bill, Rich, everybody worked DB. But yeah, I mean, you're in that little shack right in the center, right? Brings back memories.
And that shack is still there, pretty beaten up.
And Jim, while you're talking, the really interesting part about that is they couldn't close DB at night because they'd have to send a boat out to get the guy if they were
Right.
going to leave the bridge in the open position.
Yeah, right. So in the old days, it was, 3-trick, but yeah. I heard somewhere just as again, just somebody on the CNJ told me there was some CNJ bridge on their Newark branch where the operator, they actually provided a little rowboat or something. And it was like something about some of the, I forget the whole CNJ, I'm not a CNJ, but something about the Newark branch extension into Westinghouse plant or something. And there was a drawbridge over the Passaic River or something. And somebody told me, they're honest. So a CNJ guy told me that. So, but I don't think EL ever tried that. Thank goodness.
Newark Tower had a boat too, not the tower, but the bridge operator had a boat downstairs in a lower level.
Why not? Oh, interesting.
I know because I got stuck in it one time. I made a mistake of, if I can go on a little bit further with that story. I made a mistake of opening up the bridge with permission with the train dispatcher, and called the bridge tender and said, okay, you can open up. He calls me back and says, hey, I'm making pancakes, come on down. So I said, what the heck, I'll go down. Walk down there, we open up the bridge opens. It wasn't a lift bridge, it was a swing bridge. The the tugboats get through. It gets all done and we go to close up and there's no power. And I go, oh shit. You know, what am I gonna do now? And he says, oh, don't worry about it. He says, we got a rowboat right downstairs. It's only a small channel over here to get over to the other side. Well, what I didn't realize is the tide was going out. I went down to Clay Street and I had to go like hell to get back.
Oh, can I ask a quick question for the other guys? I never worked WR. Who ran the bridge at WR? Did the operator ever have to go into that bridge, or was it the maintainer?
You know, they told stories about that at some of our meetings in the past, and it seems to me like it was a hell of a job, because after they did the signals where it stopped and they did the unlock from the tower, then they had to walk onto the bridge a few feet, and they had to go down in some little
Yeah, had to like open
hole.
a trap or something on
Yeah,
the.
yeah, and then they had to do something manually in there that was very tough, because, you know, it was rusted, you know, or something, and they had to like swing it somehow. And it was like they didn't want to be bothered with that. It was a terrible thing. But I don't think the maintainer did it. I think the operator did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, over the years, they had less maintainers on site and more roving maintainers. So you'd have to call somebody. It would take a while.
Yeah, this is Jeff Van Wagenen. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I opened that bridge. I worked WR in 1969, and you set the home signals. You open the derails. You blew back the boat with a siren that was mounted in the middle of the bridge, but you could operate the siren from the tower. Then you walked out into the middle of the bridge, right in the middle. You went down a hatch, and there was a little diagram of where you pointed the bridge between a couple smokestacks as you swung it around. And as many movable bridges have, they had rails that were split. They weren't butt joints, so that you from the middle of the bridge you were able to lift up the two ends of the rail so they would swing over over the opposite rail, and you lined it up according to this little handwritten diagram inside this underneath the tracks. And but it's quite a high bridge over the Passaic River, so that it was very, very rare that there was any traffic that required it to be opened.
So you didn't have to physically walk down to the west end of the bridge.
No, you walk to the middle of the bridge.
Okay, but you didn't have to go to the west end to check on the rail alignment.
No. Once it was all interlocked. Once the home signals were set and the derails were set, my recollection is you lifted the rails not from the tower but from the middle of the bridge.
Good.
We have one comment here from Emil Wallerco. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Thank you for a great presentation. By the way, I think NJT tore down BJ Tower. I just popped that into Google Maps. I don't know how often they update that, but it still shows on Google Maps. But I'm not sure if it was torn down since then. Does anyone know if it's still standing?
Paul, I was physically there photographing it a week ago Sunday. So if they did, it would have had to been since a week ago Sunday.
Okay. And that's the last of the questions in the chat.
Okay.
One more rather trivial point, an existing tower, not on the New York division, but on the Allegheny division, still stands, is the Cuba Junction CB tower. The base of it from about, I think, of 1951 or 52 was used to house relays and batteries when they moved the control of that junction to Salamanca. And it was used for that function clear through the through the Erie-Lackawanna years. And when Conrail took over, it simply got closed up. If even that, it may not have been secured. And of course, they no longer needed it for anything. But it is still there, very much intact as it was in the early 50s. Did I say this was Mike Sly? I mean, that was a great presentation. Thank you for that.
Yes,
welcome.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for attending tonight. Thank you, Jeff, for a wonderful presentation. Hopefully we'll see some of you up in Hamburg in a month and a half, I guess. But as for the presentation, we're done tonight. Hope everyone has a good night. Thank you for attending. And hopefully you'll join us for the symposium and our next virtual meeting. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.